Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we re-embarking on an epic journey through time to answer a colossal question. How did a small island nation, tucked away in the North Atlantic, come to rule nearly a quarter of the world's population and landmass? This is the story of the British Empire, a story of ambition, innovation, conflict, and profound, lasting change. It all begins in the late 16th century. England, under Queen Elizabeth I, was an ambitious, but not yet dominant power. Defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588 was a turning point. It didn't just save England from invasion. It announced its rival as a serious naval force. This newfound confidence on the high seas paved the way for exploration and, ultimately, colonization. The first seeds of empire were sown not by grand government design, but by private enterprise. Companies like the East India Company were granted royal charters to trade in distant lands. In the early 1600s, English settlers established colonies in North America, like Jamestown and Plymouth, seeking religious freedom or economic opportunity. In the Caribbean, islands like Barbados became incredibly profitable through the cultivation of sugar, a sweetness that hid the bitter reality of the slave trade that fueled it. This first British Empire was primarily focused on the Atlantic, a network of trade, settlement, and exploitation. But then came a major setback. The American Revolution in the late 18th century saw Britain lose its 13 most populous colonies. It was a humiliating defeat. For many, it seemed like the end of the imperial dream, but Britain, ever resilient, pivoted. This loss forced a dramatic shift in focus eastward, towards Asia and Africa. This is where the Second British Empire truly takes shape. Powered by the Industrial Revolution, Britain was the first nation to industrialize. Its factories churned out textiles, iron, and machinery at an unprecedented rate. But these factories were hungry for two things: raw materials like cotton and rubber, and new markets to sell their finished goods. The empire provided both. Steamships and the telegraph, marvels of the new industrial age, shrank the world. It became easier and faster to govern, communicate with, and move troops to far-flung corners of the globe. The Royal Navy, unrivaled on the seas, became the ultimate tool of enforcement, protecting trade routes and projecting British power everywhere. This was the era of Pax Britannica, or British peace, a period where British naval dominance largely prevented large-scale wars between major powers. India became the crown jewel of this new empire. The East India Company had gradually expanded its influence from coastal trading posts to controlling vast swathes of the subcontinent. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British government took direct control, establishing the British Raj. India was a massive source of wealth, manpower for the army, and a huge market for British goods. Queen Victoria was declared Empress of India, symbolizing the deep bond and the unequal relationship between the two nations. Meanwhile, the scramble for Africa in the late 19th century saw Britain competing with other European powers to carve up the continent. Driven by a mix of economic interests, strategic rivalries, and a professed civilizing mission, Britain established a vast network of colonies from Egypt in the north to South Africa. Thinkers at the time often justified this expansion with the idea of the white man as burden, a now discredited belief that they had a moral duty to bring Western culture, Christianity, and governance to what they considered less developed societies. At its zenith, just after World War I, the British Empire was the largest in history. The sun, as the famous saying goes, never set on it. From Canada's icy north to the Australian outback, from the shores of Hong Kong to the plains of Africa, British influence was everywhere. The English language, its legal systems, and even sports, like cricket and football, spread across the globe. But empires, by their very nature, contain the seeds of their own demise. The two world wars dealt a devastating blow. Britain emerged victorious, but at a tremendous cost, both economically and psychologically. The wars shattered the myth of European invincibility and drained the treasury, making it increasingly difficult to afford the cost of maintaining a global empire. At the same time, the ideals of freedom and self-determination, which the Allies had fought for, inspired nationalist movements within the colonies. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India pioneered powerful nonviolent resistance campaigns that captured the world's attention and made British rule untenable. The dominoes began to fall quickly. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947, a momentous event that signaled the beginning of the end. Over the next 2 decades, a wave of decolonization swept across Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia. Britain, recognizing the changing tides, often managed this transition relatively peacefully, shifting the empire into the Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of independent states. The final symbolic act was the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, widely seen as the final sunset on the British Empire. So, how do we view this legacy today? It's incredibly complex and deeply controversial. On one hand, the empire connected the world in unprecedented ways, spreading language, technology, and certain legal and governmental models. It established infrastructure like railways and ports, although often to serve its own economic interests. On the other hand, its history is inseparable from violence, exploitation, and the imposition of its will on other cultures. The wealth that built Britain's grand cities was often extracted from its colonies, and the borders drawn by imperial mapmakers continue to cause conflict to this day. The legacy of empire is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It's a deeply human story of ambition, power, and the profound, often painful, ways it reshaped our modern world. Understanding it is key to understanding the world we all live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through history. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next exploration into the past. Let me know in the comments what piece of history you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.